She ran to see her billionaire husband in the operating room. Suddenly, a nurse whispered, "Hurry, Mom, hide and trust me, it's a trap." And 10 minutes later, she froze in shock when she saw him. It turned out Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. Today I pray for every woman with a heart full of deep love and unshakable respect. May the Almighty wrap you in a protection so strong that no pain can break you, a peace so gentle that it heals the storms inside you, and a light so bright that every darkness around you disappears. May He honor the women who carry families on their shoulders, who forgive when others don't, who stay kind even when the world is unkind. You are queens, you are miracles, you are the breath of compassion this world needs. I pray your days overflow with comfort, your homes overflow with blessings, and your life overflows with joy that never ends. May every woman receive the love she gives, the respect she deserves, and the happiness she has earned with her patience and sacrifice. If your heart believes in this prayer, like the video, and if you truly stand with me, write a comment. I promise I will reply to each one of you. Let's start with love. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor hummed like a warning Sandy McLeish should have heard years ago. She pressed herself against the storage curtain, fabric rough against her trembling palms, heart slamming so hard against her ribs she was certain everyone in the building could hear it. The emergency call had shattered her morning coffee, Ray's voice cracking with terror, telling her he'd collapsed at work, that paramedics were rushing him into emergency surgery, that she needed to come immediately, or she might not see him alive again. She'd dropped everything, left her coffee spilling across the kitchen counter, run 3 red lights, prayed through every intersection that she'd make it in time. The nurse who grabbed her arm in the surgical wing had eyes that knew too many secrets. "Hide now. Trust me, this isn't what you think." Those 6 words should have made no sense, but something in the woman's face, the urgency, the knowing, made Sandy obey. Now she stood frozen behind thin fabric as the operating room doors swung wide and her entire world detonated. Her husband walked through those doors, not on a gurney, not unconscious, not dying, walking, laughing, his hand resting possessively on Dr. Helena Morrison's silk-covered lower back, fingers splayed with the casual ownership of someone who'd touched that body many times before. "Is the clinic handled?" Ray's voice carried the casual tone of someone ordering takeout. Helena examined her perfect manicure. "Done this morning. Told them it was mutual. They didn't question it." Sandy's hand flew to her mouth, physically holding back the sound that wanted to tear from her throat. The clinic, her embryos, her babies, the last fragile hope after 3 devastating miscarriages, her grandmother's final wish, just one great-grandchild to hold before she died, gone, destroyed. Ray checked his watch, the expensive anniversary gift Sandy had saved for 6 months to afford. "She's probably in the parking lot right now, sobbing. Meanwhile, I'm 20 minutes from finalizing everything with the attorneys." "Timeline?" Helena pressed closer. 3 months into documenting her deterioration. Another 3 months. Then I file with all the psychiatric evidence, get the conservatorship approved, transfer everything offshore, file for divorce citing her instability, walk away clean. Helena smiled. "And our baby. We'll have everything the old woman worked for. She always looked at me like I wasn't good enough. Now her money raises my real family." 8 years. 8 years of marriage, of believing in them, of taking his constant criticism as caring, his systematic isolation as protection. 8 years of thinking she was the problem, too emotional, too desperate for a baby, too damaged to see reality clearly. 8 years of taking vitamins he gave her, never questioning why they made her feel foggy instead of healthier. The nurse materialized beside her, pressing something small into Sandy's shaking hand. A business card. "Private investigator. Your grandmother hired me 6 months before she died. She suspected everything. She left you weapons. Use them now." Sandy stared at the card as Ray and Helena disappeared around the corner, their laughter echoing off the sterile walls. Her tears stopped. Something fundamental shifted. The grief crystallized into something diamond hard and razor sharp. She'd spent 8 years being what Ray demanded, accommodating, apologetic, making herself smaller until she'd almost disappeared. She'd believed her body failed her, that her miscarriages were punishment for some inadequacy. She'd never imagined the truth was darker. The investigator, mid-50s, worn face, studied Sandy carefully. Your grandmother started documenting everything the week after her diagnosis. She knew she wouldn't live long enough to protect you. She knew you wouldn't believe her if she just told you. You loved him too completely. So she told me. Let Sandy discover the truth herself. Then she'll remember what McLeish women are made of. Then she'll fight. Multiple affairs. Sandy's voice sounded foreign. 4 years of evidence. Your grandmother left everything in her safe, behind the bedroom mirror, hidden latch on the left side. But Mrs. Allen, decide right now, what woman walks out of this hospital, the broken victim he's creating, or the fighter your grandmother raised? Sandy looked at her wedding ring. She'd cried when he proposed, overwhelmed with certainty she'd found her person. Now it just looked like evidence of stupidity. I want him destroyed, Sandy whispered, her voice carrying something cold and certain. Not divorced, completely destroyed. Revenge has a cost. It changes you. Are you willing to pay? Sandy thought about Evelyn McLeish, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd survived everything, who'd raised Sandy alone after her parents died. Evelyn had been strength personified, iron wrapped in grandmother's warmth. My grandmother taught me something, Sandy said. McLeish women might bend, might look like we're breaking, but we never actually break. We just take our time identifying who deserves to be broken instead. Then we break them so completely they can never hurt anyone else again. She straightened her spine. I'm Evelyn McLeish's granddaughter, and I'm done pretending to be weak. She walked out transformed. Not Ray Allen's pathetic wife anymore, his executioner, his reckoning, his destruction. Sandy drove home on autopilot, 8 years replaying with horrifying clarity, every moment recontextualized, every memory poisoned. Ray, convincing her to quit her architecture job, systematically eliminating her friends, taking control of finances because money stress isn't good for someone trying to conceive. The therapist after each miscarriage, always Ray's friend, reinforcing that Sandy was struggling with reality. She'd been groomed, isolated, controlled, and called it love. The house felt like enemy territory. Every piece of furniture his choice. Every wall, color his decision. Where was Sandy reflected anywhere? Nowhere. She'd been erased one choice at a time until she'd become a ghost. Almost erased, but not completely. Sandy found the hidden latch, behind the mirror, left side. She pressed it and watched the mirror swing open. Inside, one leather journal stuffed with Evelyn's handwriting. 4 years of dates, photographs, financial records, investigator reports. 4 years of meticulous documentation. 4 years of Evelyn watching her granddaughter's husband destroy her. Sandy opened to the first entry. Ray Allen is erasing my Sandy piece by piece, and she can't see it because she loves him completely. I won't live long enough to protect her. This cancer moves faster than predicted, so I'm giving her tools to protect herself. If she's reading this, he's finally revealed his face. Good. Now she can remove it permanently. Sandy read through the night. 3 affairs before Helena. Financial schemes dating back before their wedding. Ray had researched the McLeish wealth, identified Sandy as a target, engineered their chance meeting. The vasectomy records from 2 years ago, proving Ray deliberately made conception impossible while watching her cry through 3 miscarriages, letting her blame her own body. Every miscarriage had been theater. Every supportive word lies, every moment of grief his entertainment. The journal's final page held Evelyn's letter. Baby girl, if you're reading this, he's revealed himself. Don't cry, don't run, don't forgive. Make him pay for every tear, every lie, every piece he tried to erase. You are a McLeish woman. We don't break, we break others. I've left you $40 million, 3 properties, and enough evidence to put him in prison. But money isn't enough. You need to be smarter, colder, more patient. Let him think he's winning. Let him feel safe. Then destroy everything he loves when he least expects it. I'm so proud of you already. Be ruthless. Be brilliant. Be free. All my love forever, Grandma. Sandy closed the journal as Ray's car pulled in. 3 minutes, maybe less. She locked everything back, swung the mirror closed, positioned herself on the bed with tears. Real tears, but tears of rage now, though Ray would never know the difference. Ray stumbled in past midnight, reeking of Helena's jasmine perfume. He barely glanced at Sandy before heading to the shower. When he emerged, she sat up, looking small and lost. "You're home," she whispered, voice cracking perfectly. "At the hospital, they said emergency, but you weren't there, and nobody knew where you'd gone, and I was so scared." "False alarm, baby," Ray said, voice bored and contemptuous. "Felt dizzy, went home early, took medicine, crashed. Didn't you get my message?" The lie rolled smooth as silk. How many times had she believed this? "No message came through," Sandy said softly, letting her voice shake. "I was terrified." Ray sat on the bed, taking her hand in fake tenderness. "You know your real problem? You're weak. You always have been. Even your grandmother knew it. That's why she set up the inheritance with protections. She knew you couldn't handle responsibility, needed someone strong to make decisions." Sandy let tears spill. "You're right. I'm nothing without you. I don't know what I'd do if you left." Ray's smile radiated satisfaction. He kissed her forehead with patronizing affection. "Get some sleep. You look terrible." He rolled over, unconscious within minutes, secure in his superiority and her helplessness. But Sandy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mind sharper than it had been in years. The fog clouding her thinking was gone, and she understood it had never been grief or hormones. It had been the vitamins Ray gave her, the vitamins she'd taken faithfully because he said they'd help her conceive. The war had begun tonight. Ray Allen had no idea his weak, pathetic wife had transformed into the most dangerous enemy he would ever face, and by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Smile. 3 weeks into her performance, Sandy McLeish had perfected the art of becoming invisible while documenting everything. She drifted through the house like smoke, present but increasingly insubstantial, easy to overlook, easier to dismiss. She wore the same oversized cardigan for 4 days straight, left it stained with coffee and food, forgot to return phone calls from the handful of friends Ray hadn't already systematically eliminated from her life. Left the stove burning twice in 1 week, burned dinner so badly the smoke alarm went off. Once sat staring at absolutely nothing for so long that Ray had to physically shake her shoulder to get any response. "Sandy? Sandy! Jesus Christ, you're really losing it completely now." She blinked slowly, manufactured confusion clouding her expression like she was surfacing from deep underwater. "I'm sorry. I'm just so tired all the time lately. I don't understand what's wrong with me." Ray documented every single incident with his phone, photographing the burned food, the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink, Sandy sitting catatonic on the couch, staring at a blank television screen, building his case brick by brick, constructing his evidence of total incompetency. But what Ray couldn't see, what he would never see because men like him never looked closely enough at the women they thought they controlled, was Sandy in the locked bathroom afterward, eyes absolutely razor-sharp as she reviewed the latest investigator reports from Diana Torres. He had no idea that every mistake was carefully choreographed, every confused moment calculated with absolute precision, every burned meal and forgotten task part of a performance that would have won her an Oscar. Sandy had discovered something powerful in her grandmother's journals, something that changed everything. Men like Ray Allen needed to feel superior the way other people needed oxygen. Remove that feeling and they suffocated. So Sandy gave him exactly what he craved, made him feel completely invincible, absolutely certain of victory, while she quietly documented every single one of his crimes. Diana's surveillance had revealed that Ray was meeting twice weekly with an attorney named Gerald Whitmore, a specialist in conservatorship cases with a reputation for aggressive tactics and flexible ethics. They're building a comprehensive legal framework to have you declared mentally incompetent, Diana explained during one of their secret meetings in a coffee shop 40 minutes across town, far from anywhere Ray might accidentally see them. They need medical documentation of seriously erratic behavior, clear evidence of financial mismanagement, proof that you represent a danger to yourself or potentially to others. Whitmore's done this before. He's very good at manufacturing the exact evidence courts want to see. "What should I do? How do I stop this?" Sandy asked, and her voice only shook slightly. Diana's smile was absolutely glacial, and Sandy understood why her grandmother had hired this particular woman. "We don't stop it. Not yet. We let him dig himself deeper and deeper until he's buried himself so completely there's no possibility of escape. Your grandmother wanted something specific, Mrs. Allen. She didn't want you to simply win a divorce and get your money back. She wanted you to have absolute, irrefutable, overwhelming proof that would destroy him entirely, not just evidence for a divorce court, evidence that would hold up in a criminal court and put him in prison for the rest of his natural life." "How long will that take?" Sandy's hands clenched around her coffee cup hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Months, most likely. Maybe longer, depending on how careful he is. You'll have to keep playing the role of deteriorating mental patient while we document every move he makes, every lie he tells, every crime he commits. Can you do that? Can you let him keep hurting you while we build the case?" Sandy thought about the embryos, about 3 miscarriages she'd sobbed through while blaming her own supposedly broken body, about Ray laughing in that hospital corridor, so casual in his absolute cruelty, about him planning to have her locked away in some institution where she'd be completely helpless while he stole everything her grandmother had built. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "I can do whatever it takes." That evening, Ray brought Helena Morrison to their home for dinner. Again. Sandy had been expecting this particular escalation. Diana had warned her that Ray was methodically testing boundaries, pushing harder and harder to see exactly how much Sandy would tolerate before she finally broke completely. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier to endure. Watching her husband walk through their front door with his pregnant mistress, both of them smiling like victorious generals surveying conquered territory, required every single ounce of Sandy's newfound iron control. "Sandy, you remember Dr. Helena Morrison from the hospital," Ray said, and his voice carried that distinctive mocking edge that made Sandy want to throw something sharp at his face. "She's been helping me manage some ongoing medical issues. I thought it would be good for you two to spend some real time together, since you'll probably be seeing quite a lot of each other going forward." The subtext couldn't have been clearer if he'd written it on a billboard. "Helena's moving into my life permanently. She's carrying my baby, and you're going to smile and accept it because you're too weak and broken to do anything else." Sandy wiped her deliberately trembling hands on her food-stained apron. "It's lovely to see you again, Dr. Morrison. Ray speaks so highly of your excellent work. I'm very grateful you're taking such good care of him." Helena's smile was purely predatory, all expensive highlights and perfect makeup and designer clothes that probably cost more than Sandy's entire wardrobe. Everything Sandy wasn't anymore, everything she'd carefully stopped being over the past 3 weeks. "Please, call me Helena. Your husband is a truly remarkable man, Sandy. You're very fortunate to have someone so dedicated to your well-being, especially given your recent struggles." "I know," Sandy whispered, letting her voice crack just slightly. "I really don't deserve him at all. He's been so patient with me even though I keep making mistakes and forgetting things and disappointing him constantly." She watched Ray and Helena exchange one of those quick, knowing glances that couples share when they think nobody else is paying attention. "We've won. She's completely broken. This is almost too easy." They thought she couldn't see, but Sandy saw everything now. Dinner was absolutely excruciating in ways that would have destroyed the woman Sandy had been just a month ago. She deliberately undercooked the chicken until it was still pink in the middle, then served it with elaborate apologies and visible distress. Ray made an enormous show of ordering pizza delivery instead, treating Sandy like an incompetent child who couldn't be trusted with basic tasks in front of his mistress. They talked over Sandy constantly, around her like she was furniture, occasionally about her as though she'd already ceased to exist as a real person with thoughts and feelings. The grief over her grandmother's death has been incredibly difficult for her to process, Ray told Helena with perfectly performed sympathy. She and Evelyn were extremely close. I think Sandy's having real trouble accepting that her grandmother is actually gone. Sometimes I wonder if that's contributing to her current mental state, unresolved grief manifesting as these concerning behavioral changes. I can definitely see that, Helena said, examining Sandy with cold clinical detachment like she was a particularly interesting laboratory specimen. Has she been evaluated for medication? Sometimes antipsychotic drugs can help stabilize patients experiencing this type of episode. Early intervention is really crucial before the condition progresses further. I don't want to take any pills. Sandy forced tears into her eyes on command. They make me feel so foggy and disconnected. I already feel like I'm disappearing, like I'm losing myself piece by piece. Pills would just make that so much worse. That's exactly the illness talking, sweetheart, Ray said, with that particular firm gentleness that probably sounded caring to anyone who didn't know better. We're going to get you the help you clearly need, Sandy, whether you want it or not. Because I love you too much to just stand by and watch you deteriorate like this. That's what real love means. Doing what's necessary, even when it's hard. The threat hung in the air between them, crystal clear to anyone paying attention. Involuntary psychiatric commitment. Another weapon in Ray's increasingly sophisticated arsenal. Sandy excused herself to use the bathroom, where she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of pure, undiluted rage. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles went bone white and her hands ached. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. This stranger's face she'd deliberately made look haunted and lost, and wanted to scream until her throat bled. She wanted to march back into that dining room and expose every single lie, watch their faces collapse in shock and fear, see Ray finally understand that he'd catastrophically underestimated her. But revenge wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, and Sandy was prepared to run as far as necessary. When she returned to the dining room, she was meek and apologetic again. She served store-bought dessert because she'd completely forgotten to make the elaborate pie she'd mentioned planning earlier that week. She endured Ray and Helena casually discussing their upcoming plans. A medical conference in Miami next month, a research collaboration project they were working on together, coded language for the future life they were planning to build on the ashes of Sandy's destroyed existence. After Helena finally left sometime past 11, Ray cornered Sandy in the kitchen, where she was slowly, methodically cleaning up the detritus of the worst dinner party of her life. "You were absolutely pathetic tonight," he said, and there was no attempt at gentleness anymore, just pure contempt and disgust. Crying over nothing, fumbling around like you've never cooked a meal before, forgetting basic things. You embarrassed me in front of a respected colleague, Sandy. That's unacceptable. Sandy kept her eyes fixed on the floor, on her own feet in worn slippers. "I'm so sorry. I'm trying as hard as I can. I really am." "Well, try harder." He grabbed her chin roughly, forcing her to make eye contact, and Sandy had to consciously prevent herself from jerking away or showing any hint of the rage boiling in her chest. "Because I'm running out of patience with this situation, and when my patience runs out completely, there are specialized facilities where you can get intensive professional help. Places where they can monitor you constantly, adjust your medications, keep you safe from yourself. Is that what you want, Sandy? Is that really what you want to force me to do?" Institutionalization. The threat was no longer implied or subtle. It was right there in the open, a promise and a weapon. Sandy let appropriate fear flash across her face. Not difficult, since part of her genuinely wondered just how far Ray was willing to go, what lines he'd be willing to cross. "I'll do better. I promise I'll be better. Please don't send me away. Please. Ray released her chin with a small shove that sent her stumbling back half a step. Good. Now finish cleaning this disaster up. I'm going to bed. He walked away, leaving Sandy alone in the kitchen with greasy pizza boxes and dirty dishes, and her grandmother's voice echoing in her head from that final letter. We don't break, we break others. Later that night, long after Ray had fallen into his usual alcohol-assisted unconsciousness, Sandy met Diana Torres at their designated spot, a 24-hour diner on the edge of town where the staff was paid well to mind their own business and forget faces. The investigator's expression was grimmer than usual, which meant bad news was coming. Ray's accelerating his timeline, Diana said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table. He's scheduled a formal psychiatric evaluation for you next week, claims you're becoming an imminent danger to yourself. The evaluating psychiatrist is Dr. Marcus Westfield, and he's absolutely on Ray's payroll. This isn't going to be a real evaluation, Mrs. Allen. It's going to be a performance where Westfield writes whatever diagnosis Ray paid him to write. Sandy's pulse kicked up despite her best efforts to stay calm. Can they actually force me to be evaluated? Don't I have rights? Normally, yes. But Ray's planning to get a temporary emergency psychiatric hold by claiming you made threats of self-harm. He's going to use tonight's dinner as part of his evidence. Helena Morrison is prepared to provide sworn testimony that she personally witnessed you exhibiting severely erratic and potentially dangerous behavior. With a physician's statement and his own documentation, he can probably get a judge to sign the order. So what do I do? How do I fight this? You don't fight it. Not directly. Diana's smile was sharp enough to cut. I've already contacted Dr. Sarah Kim. She's a completely independent psychiatrist with an outstanding reputation and absolutely no connection to Ray or anyone in his circle. She's agreed to conduct her own comprehensive evaluation of you this week before Ray's scheduled appointment with Westfield. When Ray tries to present his fraudulent diagnosis to the court, we'll counter with Dr. Kim's legitimate professional evaluation, proving you're perfectly mentally competent and that the symptoms Ray documented were actually caused by something else entirely. It'll expose his entire conspiracy in one devastating move. Sandy forced herself to take several deep breaths, trying to process the implications. This is so much harder than I imagined it would be, letting him keep hurting me while we build the case. Your grandmother warned me about that, Diana said quietly, something almost gentle entering her normally professional expression. She told me you'd want to fight back immediately, that you'd hate having to play weak and damaged. But she also told me something else. She said that when you finally stopped trying to save your marriage and started trying to end the man who'd destroyed it, you'd be absolutely unstoppable. She had complete faith in you, Mrs. Allen. Complete faith that you were strong enough to do whatever this required. That night, Ray came home sometime after 2 in the morning, drunk enough that he could barely walk straight. Sandy pretended to be deeply asleep, but listened carefully as he stumbled through the bedroom, his phone pressed against his ear, his voice slurred but still perfectly understandable. She's almost completely gone now. Another month at absolute maximum before I can file everything. The psychiatric evaluation scheduled, Morrison's testimony is locked in. Westfield knows exactly what diagnosis to write. Once Sandy's officially committed to a psychiatric facility, I file for the emergency conservatorship, get immediate access to all the accounts, transfer everything offshore before she even understands what's happening. Then we can finally be together for real, baby. You, me, our baby, and the life we've earned, the life we deserve. A pause while whoever was on the other end, obviously Helena, said something Sandy couldn't quite hear. Of course I love you. You're carrying my actual child, my real future. Sandy's just an obstacle that's about to be permanently removed. Honestly, she should have died with her pathetic grandmother and saved everyone all this trouble. Sandy's eyes flew open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while rage poured through her veins like acid. Should have died with her grandmother. He'd wished her dead, casually, like it was nothing, like she was nothing. She waited until Ray's snoring indicated he'd passed out completely, then carefully extracted her phone and texted Jameson Cartwright. The lawyer Diana had insisted she needed to meet. He wants me dead. Not just controlled, dead. The response came back within 2 minutes despite the late hour. Not yet. Let him file his conservatorship petition. Let him commit fully to his plan where he can't retreat or backtrack. Then we destroy everything. Trust the process. Trust me. Sandy put her phone away and lay in bed beside her unconscious husband. This man she'd planned to spend her entire life with. This man she'd loved so completely and trusted so absolutely. But watching him snore and drool on his pillow, vulnerable and clueless about the storm building around him, Sandy felt something cold and crystalline settle permanently into her chest. Not love, not even hatred anymore, not really. Just pure, focused, absolutely ruthless purpose. Ray Allen wanted to erase her from existence, steal everything her grandmother had built through decades of hard work, leave Sandy broken and forgotten in some psychiatric facility where nobody would ever believe anything she said. Instead, Sandy was going to make absolutely certain that Ray Allen was the one who completely disappeared. She closed her eyes and slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. Because the hunter always rests before the kill. Chapter 3. The Ruthless Alliance. Jameson Cartwright's law office occupied the entire 15th floor of a building downtown that screamed old money, serious consequences, and absolute discretion. Sandy walked through the heavy oak doors without an appointment, her carefully maintained mask of confusion temporarily discarded. Diana Torres had given her this address 3 days ago, told her that this particular lawyer was different from the others, that he was worth the considerable risk of being seen entering a law office when Ray had people watching her movements, worth trusting with everything. The receptionist looked up with professional concern. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Mr. Cartwright's schedule is usually quite—" "Tell him Sandy McLeish is here. Tell him Diana Torres sent me. He'll see me." The receptionist's expression shifted into something more careful, more knowing. She picked up her phone, spoke quietly into it, then nodded toward the inner office doors. "Mr. Cartwright will see you immediately. Go right in." Jameson Cartwright stood from behind a massive desk as Sandy entered, and something in his face told her he already knew exactly why she'd come, what she needed, what she was prepared to do. He was younger than she'd expected from his reputation, maybe 40 at most, black, impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed absolutely nothing and had seen far too much. "Mrs. Allen, Diana said you'd come eventually, though I admit I expected it sooner." He gestured toward one of the leather chairs positioned across from his desk. "Please, sit down, and please tell me exactly what you want from this situation, not what happened to you. Diana's already briefed me thoroughly on your husband's actions. I need to know what outcome you're seeking. What does victory look like from your perspective? Not what happened, not what Ray did, what she wanted." Sandy appreciated that more than he could possibly know. "I want him destroyed," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "Not divorced, not just separated. I want Ray Allen completely and utterly destroyed in every way that matters. I want him losing everything, his reputation, his medical license, his freedom, his future. I want Helena Morrison understanding she chose the wrong man. I want everyone who knows us understanding exactly what he is, and I want him in prison for as long as legally possible." Jameson studied her for a long moment that felt like an assessment, an evaluation of her resolve and commitment. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a silver-framed photograph, turning it around so Sandy could see the image clearly. A woman with a radiant smile and glowing dark skin, one hand resting protectively on an obviously pregnant belly, joy radiating from every pixel. "My wife, Rebecca," Jameson said, and his voice carried a weight of grief that time hadn't fully healed. "She died 3 years ago next month. Aggressive cancer that moved faster than any treatment could stop. 6 months from diagnosis to death, and I spent every one of those days watching her suffer." He set the photograph down carefully, reverently. "Before Rebecca got sick, I was a corporate defense attorney, made millions every year defending pharmaceutical companies, chemical manufacturers, corporations that poisoned entire communities and then called it acceptable cost of doing business. I was very, very good at protecting people who deserved prosecution, not protection. I won cases that should never have been won, got verdicts that denied justice to people who desperately needed it. Jameson's eyes met Sandy's directly. When Rebecca got sick, I spent every dollar I'd earned trying to save her. The absolute best doctors, experimental treatments not even approved yet, everything money could buy. And none of it worked. She died anyway. And while she was dying, while I was sitting beside her hospital bed holding her hand, I realized something that changed everything. I'd spent my entire extremely successful career defending exactly the kinds of companies and people who probably created the environmental toxins that gave my wife her cancer in the first place. "That's why you quit corporate law," Sandy said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Rebecca made me promise something 2 days before she died. She was so weak by then she could barely speak. But she held my hand and made me swear I'd become someone she could be proud of. Someone who used his skills to help people who actually deserved help. So I quit Hartman and Associates the day after her funeral. Started taking divorce cases, custody battles, anything where I could actually make a difference for people who needed it desperately." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "I don't do this work for money anymore, Mrs. Allen. I do it for something Diana probably told you was impossible, redemption. But it's not my redemption I'm seeking, it's yours. Your chance to take back everything your husband tried to steal. Your chance to make sure he never does this to anyone else ever again." Sandy pulled out the thick folder Diana had given her, copies of her grandmother's journal, financial records showing systematic theft, printouts of Ray's emails, medical documentation of the vasectomy. She spread them across Jameson's expensive desk like crime scene evidence at a murder trial. Jameson reviewed every single page in complete silence, his expression growing progressively darker and more grim as he absorbed the full scope of what Ray had done. When he finally finished reading and looked up, there was something approaching respect in his eyes. "Your grandmother was extraordinarily thorough in her documentation. This evidence alone is enough to win you a divorce and full restitution of your financial assets. Probably punitive damages on top of that. You could walk away from this marriage today with everything you're legally entitled to and never see Ray Allen again." "But that's not enough," Sandy said. "That's not what I want. That's not what my grandmother wanted when she hired Diana." "No," Jameson agreed. "It's not. Because a divorce doesn't stop him, does it? It doesn't protect the next woman he targets. It doesn't punish him for what he did to you. It just inconveniences him temporarily and forces him to find a different victim with a different inheritance to steal." "Exactly. So what do we need? What else do we need beyond what my grandmother documented?" "We need him committing new crimes," Jameson said, and his smile was absolutely sharp enough to draw blood. "Crimes we can document in real time with unimpeachable evidence. Crimes that move this beyond civil court and into criminal prosecution. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly attempted murder, depending on how aggressively we want to frame the embryo destruction and his plans for your psychiatric commitment." He stood up and moved to the windows overlooking the city. "Your grandmother's evidence gets us started. It establishes pattern and motive and opportunity. But for what you want, for complete destruction, we need Ray hanging himself with rope we've carefully provided. We need to let him proceed with his conservatorship plan, let him commit to it so deeply he can't possibly retreat or claim it was all a misunderstanding. We document every move, every lie, every fraudulent action. And then, when he's gone far enough that there's no possible defense, we spring the trap and watch his entire world collapse in a single catastrophic moment." "How long will that take?" Sandy's hands clenched in her lap. "Months, most likely. Maybe longer depending on how careful Ray is and how quickly he moves. You'll have to continue playing the role of mentally deteriorating patient while we build an absolutely airtight case. You'll have to let him keep hurting you, keep controlling you, keep thinking he's winning right up until the moment we prove he's lost everything. Can you do that, Mrs. Allen? Can you maintain the performance that long?" Sandy thought about the embryos Ray had destroyed so casually, about 3 miscarriages where she'd cried herself to sleep blaming her own supposedly broken body, about Ray laughing with Helena in that hospital corridor, so absolutely certain of his superiority and her helplessness, about him planning to have her locked in a psychiatric facility where she'd be completely powerless while he stole everything her grandmother had built. "Yes," she said, and her voice held iron certainty. "I can do whatever this requires for as long as necessary. I will not break." "Most people do break," Jameson warned seriously. "The humiliation of playing weak when you're actually strong, the constant fear of being caught, the psychological toll of letting someone hurt you when you could stop them. It destroys most people long before we get to court. That's why I asked the question directly. I need to know if you're genuinely capable of seeing this through." "I'm my grandmother's granddaughter," Sandy said simply. "Evelyn McLeish spent 40 years building an empire in a business that tried to exclude women at every opportunity. She survived discrimination, betrayal, sabotage, bankruptcy attempts. She raised me alone after my parents died and never once complained about how hard it was. She taught me that McLeish women don't break under pressure. We just take our time identifying exactly who deserves being broken instead." Jameson smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Then we have an agreement. But Mrs. Allen, before we proceed, I need to warn you about something important. When this ends, when Ray's in prison and you've won everything, you'll need to have a plan for what comes after the victory. Revenge is satisfying, but it's not fulfilling. It doesn't actually heal the wounds or rebuild what was destroyed. You need to think about who you want to be after this war is over." "I promise you I will," Sandy said. "After Ray's destroyed and locked away where he can never hurt anyone else, I'll find a way to rebuild something positive from these ruins." "Good, because your grandmother didn't want you consumed by bitterness for the rest of your life. She wanted you free." Jameson returned to his desk and pulled out a legal pad. "Now, let's discuss specific strategy. First, we need to let Ray's psychiatric evaluation proceed as planned, but we'll have Dr. Kim's independent evaluation completed first, establishing your perfect competency. When Ray presents Westfield's fraudulent diagnosis, we'll immediately counter with Kim's legitimate findings. That exposes the conspiracy right at the start." They spent the next 2 hours mapping out the complete strategy in meticulous detail. Every document that would need to be filed, every piece of evidence they'd need to gather, every potential pitfall they'd need to avoid. Jameson was thorough to the point of obsessive, and Sandy appreciated that more than she could express. This wasn't someone who took chances or left things to improvisation. "What about Helena?" Sandy asked eventually. "She's pregnant with his child. She's testified in his conservatorship filing. She's helped him every step of the way. I want her paying consequences too." "Pregnant women become very cooperative very quickly when they realize the father of their baby is facing serious prison time," Jameson said with cold practicality. "We'll offer Helena full immunity from prosecution in exchange for complete testimony against Ray. She'll take the deal. She has no choice if she wants avoiding prison while raising an infant alone." "That means she walks away clean," Sandy said, and she couldn't keep the bitterness entirely out of her voice. "After everything she did to help him, after destroying my embryos, after planning to testify that I'm mentally ill, she just gets immunity and moves on with her life." "She gets immunity from criminal prosecution," Jameson corrected carefully. "But she doesn't get immunity from public exposure, from professional consequences, from everyone who knows her understanding exactly what she did and what she chose to participate in. She'll lose her medical reputation, probably her license, definitely her self-image as a good person. Sometimes that's actually worse than a prison sentence, Mrs. Allen. Sometimes living with what you've done and who you've become is the worst punishment possible." Sandy left Jameson's office 2 hours later feeling fundamentally different. Lighter somehow, despite the heavy weight of what lay ahead. For the first time since that hospital corridor, she felt genuine hope, not just the possibility of survival, but the real probability of victory. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. A text from Ray. "Where are you? Doctor's appointment in an hour. Don't forget, come home now." Sandy typed back with shaking hands that she made sure looked convincingly unsteady in case Ray ever checked the message metadata. "Coming now, so sorry, got confused about time, leaving right now." She could picture his satisfied, contemptuous smile as he read her message. Poor, broken, confused Sandy, who couldn't even keep track of basic appointments anymore. Perfect. Let him think exactly that right up until the moment his entire world shattered into irreparable pieces. Sandy started her car and headed home, already sliding the mask of confusion and helplessness back into place. The performance would continue. The documentation would continue. The trap would be set perfectly. And when it finally closed around Ray Allen, there would be absolutely no escape. Chapter 4. The Calculated Seduction. The psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Marcus Westfield happened in a cold office that smelled like leather furniture polish and barely concealed corruption. Dr. Westfield was exactly what Sandy expected from Diana's description. Late 50s, expensive suit that looked deliberately chosen to project authority and trustworthiness. The kind of bland, forgettable face that disappeared in crowds. He barely glanced at Sandy before starting his prepared questions, his pen already positioned over the evaluation form to write whatever diagnosis Ray Allen had paid him substantial money to produce. "Mrs. Allen, your husband tells me you've been experiencing significant difficulties over the past several months," Westfield began, his voice carrying that particular tone doctors used when they'd already decided you were unreliable. "Memory problems, confusion, emotional instability that's becoming increasingly concerning?" Sandy made her voice small and uncertain, exactly the way she'd practiced dozens of times in front of her bathroom mirror. "I forget things sometimes, important things. I get confused about what day it is, whether I've taken my vitamins, if I've already eaten breakfast. I don't understand what's wrong with me. I used to be so organized, so capable. Now I feel like I'm disappearing a little bit more every single day." "Do you hear voices that other people can't hear? See things that aren't actually there?" "No, nothing like that. I feel lost constantly, like I'm trying to find my way through thick fog and I can't see where I'm going or where I've been. Everything feels distant and unreal, like I'm watching my own life happen to someone else." Dr. Westfield made careful notes, and Sandy could see the predetermined diagnosis forming in real time right there on his page. Psychotic breaks, danger to self, mentally incompetent, requires immediate intensive treatment. Every answer she gave was being systematically twisted and reinterpreted to fit the narrative Ray needed, to support the conservatorship petition that would give him legal control over everything. She played along perfectly, giving Westfield exactly enough material to work with, while carefully avoiding anything so extreme it would be obviously fabricated. Too much crazy, and even a corrupt psychiatrist couldn't sell the diagnosis, just enough to sound genuinely unstable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. The evaluation lasted 90 excruciating minutes, question after question designed to produce responses that could be mischaracterized as signs of serious mental illness. Do you ever feel like people are watching you? Do you have thoughts about hurting yourself? Do you trust your husband to make good decisions for you? Have you been taking your prescribed medications regularly? When it finally ended, Dr. Westfield's expression radiated professional satisfaction mixed with barely concealed greed. "Mrs. Allen, based on what I'm observing today and the documentation your husband has provided, I'm going to be recommending some very serious interventions. Medication adjustments certainly, but also potentially a supervised residential treatment facility where you can receive intensive professional care and monitoring. Somewhere safe where you can't accidentally hurt yourself during these episodes." A facility. Sandy let real fear creep into her voice because this part wasn't acting anymore. The threat of involuntary institutionalization genuinely terrified her. Like a psychiatric hospital. A place specifically designed to help people experiencing exactly what you're going through, Westfield said with false gentleness that made Sandy's skin crawl. Your husband loves you very much, Mrs. Allen. He only wants what's absolutely best for your health and safety. You're very fortunate to have someone so dedicated to your well-being. Sandy nodded meekly, playing the compliant patient one final time. But as she left Westfield's office and climbed into her car in the parking garage, she immediately texted Jameson. Performance complete. He bought every single word. Diagnosis will say exactly what Ray paid for. Jameson's response came within seconds. Excellent work. Dr. Kim's evaluation is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her findings will completely contradict Westfield's paid diagnosis. Now we wait for Ray to file and commit himself fully. Stay strong. That evening, Ray came home with champagne and an expression of barely contained triumph. We're celebrating tonight, baby, he announced, already opening the expensive bottle and pouring 2 glasses with hands that shook slightly from excitement. Dr. Westfield called me this afternoon with his preliminary findings. He's recommending conservatorship immediately. This is all for your own good, Sandy. You need help that you clearly can't manage on your own anymore. But I promise I'll make sure you're taken care of properly. I'll handle everything so you don't have to worry about anything ever again. Conservatorship? Sandy echoed, carefully letting confusion cloud her expression like she didn't understand the word's meaning or implications. What does that mean exactly? It means I'll take care of all the complicated adult responsibilities, managing the finances, making medical decisions, handling the legal matters, all the difficult things you can't handle in your current condition. You won't have to stress about anything anymore. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Doesn't that sound like exactly what you need right now? Translation so obvious even someone actually mentally impaired could understand it. I'll control absolutely everything and you'll have zero say in your own existence while I systematically steal everything your grandmother left you. Ray pulled out a thick stack of papers from his briefcase, spreading them across the dining room table with the confident gestures of someone who'd already won. These are just preliminary authorization forms, very routine, very standard. They give me temporary power of attorney while the full conservatorship petition moves through the court system. Just sign here and initial these 3 pages. Nothing complicated. Sandy examined the papers with exaggerated difficulty, squinting at the text like the words refused to hold still, appearing to struggle with basic reading comprehension. They were exactly what Jameson had warned her about. Broad authorizations that would give Ray immediate access to her bank accounts, the ability to make binding medical decisions, permission to move her into a psychiatric facility if he deemed it necessary. If she signed these documents correctly and they were properly witnessed, Ray would have essentially total control within hours. I don't really understand all these legal words, Sandy said slowly, letting her hand tremble visibly as she picked up the pen Ray offered. There's so much text and it's all so confusing. Maybe I should have a lawyer look at this first. Isn't that what people normally do with important papers? Ray's patience visibly frayed at the edges, his mask of loving concern slipping just slightly. You don't need a lawyer, Sandy. You have me, and I would never do anything that wasn't in your absolute best interest. I'm your husband. I'm the person who loves you more than anyone else in the world. Don't you trust me? I do trust you, Sandy said quickly, letting tears well up. Of course I trust you. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. Everything is so confusing lately. I'm sorry. Then just sign the forms, Ray said, and his voice had gone cold in that particular way that used to make Sandy immediately comply with whatever he wanted. Unless you want to make this more difficult than it needs to be. Unless you want this dragging out publicly through the courts with everyone we know watching and judging. Is that really what you want, Sandy? No, she whispered. I'll sign. I'm sorry. She picked up the pen with deliberately shaky hands and started to sign her name. But halfway through, she accidentally signed on the completely wrong line, in the space marked for witness signatures instead of the primary signer line. The kind of mistake that invalidated the entire document, made it legally worthless, but could easily be explained away as confusion from someone supposedly experiencing serious cognitive decline. Ray wouldn't notice the error until he tried to actually file the paperwork with his bank or his lawyers. By then, Jameson would have already filed their counter-motion with Dr. Kim's comprehensive evaluation, proving Sandy was perfectly competent. "Good girl," Ray said, taking the papers and barely glancing at them before tucking them back into his briefcase. "See? That wasn't so difficult. Now go upstairs and get ready for bed. You look exhausted. Helena's coming over later, and we need to discuss some medical matters privately." Sandy went upstairs obediently, but she didn't get ready for bed. She stood in the bathroom with the door locked and sent Jameson a detailed message describing exactly what had just happened, attaching photos of the invalidly signed documents that Ray had carelessly left on the dining room table for 10 minutes before securing them. Helena arrived within the hour, and Sandy listened from upstairs as Ray and his pregnant mistress celebrated their apparent victory with expensive wine and plans for their future. Their voices drifted up through the old house's inadequate insulation, and Sandy heard every word. "The forms are signed," Ray said, his voice thick with alcohol and satisfaction. "Westfield's filing his official evaluation tomorrow. Morrison's testimony is locked in. Within 2 weeks maximum, I'll have complete legal conservatorship. Then we move all the money to the Cayman accounts we set up, file for divorce on grounds of her mental incompetence, and it's finished. $40 million and absolute freedom to build the life we actually want." "And the baby?" Helena's voice, careful and calculating. "Our baby will have everything Sandy's pathetic grandmother worked for. Perfect justice. The old bitch always looked at me like I was dirt under her expensive shoes. Now her fortune is going to raise my actual child, my real family. I wish she was still alive just so she could know how completely I won." Sandy gripped the bathroom sink hard enough that her fingers went numb. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. This stranger's face she'd made look haunted and helpless, and felt that cold, crystalline rage settle even deeper into her bones. Ray wanted to erase her, take everything, leave her locked in some institution where no one would ever believe her. Instead, she was going to erase him so completely it would be like he'd never existed at all. After Helena finally left around midnight and Ray passed out drunk in their bed, Sandy crept downstairs and did something she'd been planning for days. She went to the bathroom cabinet and found the bottle of prenatal vitamins Ray had been giving her for over a year. The pills he'd told her would help her conceive, improve her fertility, prepare her body for pregnancy. She'd stopped taking them 3 weeks ago when she'd first discovered the truth. But the bottle was still there, still half full of the small blue pills that looked like 1,000 other supplements. Sandy carefully wrapped the bottle in a plastic bag and hid it in her purse. Tomorrow, she'd give it to Diana, who'd have it analyzed by an independent laboratory. If those pills contained anything other than actual vitamins, if Ray had been systematically drugging her to cause the exact symptoms he then documented as evidence of mental illness, that would transform everything from fraud to felony assault, from conservatorship abuse to attempted murder. Sandy went back to bed beside her unconscious husband, and for the first time since the hospital corridor, she felt something that might have been actual peace, not happiness, not even satisfaction yet, but the certainty that she was finally, truly fighting back, that she wasn't a victim anymore but a warrior, that her grandmother's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. Ray Allen had made one catastrophic mistake. He'd assumed that because Sandy loved him, because she'd trusted him completely, because she'd spent 8 years accommodating his every demand, that she was fundamentally weak. He'd confused kindness with weakness, gentleness with helplessness, love with stupidity. And now he was going to pay for that mistake with everything he valued, his freedom, his future, his life as he knew it. Sandy closed her eyes and slept deeply, dreamlessly. Tomorrow the pills would go to the lab. Tomorrow Dr. Kim would conduct the real evaluation. Tomorrow the trap would begin closing around Ray's throat. And this time, there would be no escape. Chapter 5. The Fracture. The morning Ray filed his conservatorship petition, Sandy woke before dawn to find him already gone from their bed. Her phone showed 3 messages from Jameson, each one time-stamped in the early morning hours. Ray filed at 8:47 a.m. emergency conservatorship, claiming imminent danger. Attached Westfield's evaluation and Helena's sworn statement. Judge Morrison assigned. That's very good for us. She doesn't tolerate fraud. Second message. Counter motion ready to file. Dr. Kim's evaluation attached, also including lab results from the pills. Sandy, they contained benzodiazepines. Ray was systematically drugging you. This changes everything. Third message. Get dressed. Not the clothes you've been wearing. Something professional. Something that looks like the real you. We're going to court today and ending this. War goes fully public in 3 hours. Sandy moved fast, showering away weeks of deliberately cultivated neglect, washing her hair properly for the first time in days, putting on one of the professional dresses from her architecture days that she'd hidden in the back of her closet. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Sharp, focused, angry, alive. Diana picked her up at 9, and they drove to Jameson's office in silence that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. The conference room was full of people Sandy had never met, paralegals, assistants, someone Diana introduced as Trevor, who was apparently a forensic accountant. Everyone moved with urgent purpose, and the energy in the room was electric. Jameson handed Sandy a thick folder, his expression grim and satisfied in equal measure. Ray filed for emergency conservatorship exactly as predicted, claims you're an imminent danger to yourself based on Westfield's evaluation and Helena Morrison's testimony. Judge Morrison has scheduled an emergency hearing for 2 p.m. today. She wants to resolve this immediately given the serious allegations. What happens at the hearing? Sandy's hands shook as she held the folder. Ray will present his case, Westfield's fraudulent diagnosis, Helena's false testimony, whatever other lies he's manufactured. Then we present Dr. Kim's legitimate evaluation showing you're perfectly competent. We present the lab analysis of the pills showing Ray was systematically poisoning you. We present your grandmother's documentation of his pattern of financial abuse, and we request an emergency restraining order, forcing him out of your house while we file criminal charges. Criminal charges. Attempted murder through systematic poisoning, fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit conservatorship abuse. The district attorney's office has been following this case thanks to Diana's contacts. They're prepared to arrest Ray as soon as Judge Morrison rules. The hearing happened in a courtroom that felt too small for everything that was about to explode inside it. Sandy sat beside Jameson at one table while Ray and his lawyer, an expensive corporate attorney named Gerald Whitmore, sat at another. Ray looked smug, confident, like a man who'd already won and was just waiting for the formalities. He barely glanced at Sandy. Why would he? In his mind, she was already defeated, already broken, already locked away where she couldn't cause him problems. Judge Morrison entered. A woman in her 60s with steel-grey hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen every lie possible and believed none of them. This is an emergency conservatorship hearing for Sandra McLeish Allen. Mr. Whitmore, you filed the petition. Present your case. Whitmore stood, smooth and professional. Your Honor, my client Ray Allen is here today out of desperate concern for his wife's deteriorating mental condition. Mrs. Allen has experienced severe cognitive decline over the past 6 months. Memory loss, confusion, inability to care for herself, increasingly erratic behavior. Dr. Marcus Westfield, a respected psychiatrist, has evaluated her and found clear evidence of serious mental illness requiring immediate intervention. He slid Westfield's evaluation across to the judge. Additionally, Dr. Helena Morrison, a physician who has observed Mrs. Allen's condition firsthand, has provided sworn testimony that Mrs. Allen represents a danger to herself. Mr. Allen is requesting emergency conservatorship solely to protect his wife and ensure she receives proper care. Judge Morrison read Westfield's evaluation without expression. And what does Mrs. Allen say about this diagnosis? Mrs. Allen lacks the capacity to understand her own condition, Whitmore said smoothly. That's precisely why this conservatorship is necessary. Mrs. Allen looks fairly capable of understanding right now, Judge Morrison observed dryly, looking directly at Sandy in her professional dress and clear eyes. Counselor, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Jameson stood. Mrs. Allen wishes to present evidence that completely contradicts everything Mr. Whitmore just claimed, Your Honor. This isn't a medical emergency. This is fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Jameson continued before anyone could interrupt. Dr. Sarah Kim, a completely independent psychiatrist with no connection to either party, evaluated Mrs. Allen 2 days ago. Her findings show Mrs. Allen is perfectly competent, shows no signs of mental illness, and is clearly capable of managing her own affairs. I'm submitting Dr. Kim's full evaluation now. He slid a thick document across to Judge Morrison, who began reading with increasing interest. Furthermore, Jameson said, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, we have laboratory analysis showing that the prenatal vitamins Mr. Allen gave his wife for over a year contained benzodiazepines, anti-anxiety medication that, when taken long-term without medical supervision, causes exactly the symptoms Mr. Allen then documented as evidence of mental illness. Mr. Allen was systematically poisoning his wife to create the appearance of incompetence. Ray's face went absolutely white. Whitmore looked like he'd been hit with a hammer. Additionally, Jameson continued relentlessly, we have evidence that Mr. Allen secretly had a vasectomy 2 years ago while allowing his wife to believe her inability to conceive was her body's failure. We have documentation that he authorized destruction of her frozen embryos without her knowledge or consent. We have financial records showing he's stolen nearly $2 million from her accounts. And we have evidence he's done this before, approximately 5 years ago, to a woman named Christine Valdez, using the exact same pattern and the exact same psychiatrist to attempt gaining control of her assets. Judge Morrison's expression had gone from skeptical to furious. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to explain how your client accidentally filed a conservatorship petition based entirely on a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation and evidence of systematic abuse. Whitmore was scrambling, clearly blindsided. Your Honor, these allegations are completely unsubstantiated. Mrs. Allen is obviously being manipulated by... The laboratory analysis is unsubstantiated, Judge Morrison interrupted coldly. The independent psychiatric evaluation is manipulation. I'm looking at scientific evidence and professional medical opinions that directly contradict everything your client claimed, so either you were lied to by Mr. Allen or you participated in this fraud. Which is it? Ray tried to stand, tried to speak, but Whitmore physically pushed him back down into his chair. Judge Morrison set down the documents and looked directly at Ray with undisguised disgust. Mr. Allen, I'm denying your conservatorship petition immediately. It's clear this was a fraudulent filing designed to steal your wife's assets. Furthermore, I'm issuing an emergency restraining order. You're to have no contact with Mrs. Allen effective immediately. You have 1 hour to remove yourself from the marital home and collect only personal belongings. If you're not out within 60 minutes, you'll be arrested. Your Honor, Whitmore tried desperately, I'm not finished. I'm also ordering a full criminal investigation into these allegations. The evidence suggests serious crimes including fraud, assault, and attempted financial exploitation. This case is being referred to the district attorney immediately. She slammed her gavel. We're adjourned. Mr. Allen, if I were you, I'd be hiring a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Ray was shouting something Sandy couldn't hear over the noise. Whitmore was frantically gathering documents. Court officers were moving forward to enforce the restraining order, and Sandy just sat there, feeling like she was watching everything from a great distance, unable to quite believe it had actually worked. Jameson touched her shoulder gently. You did it. He's done. It's over. But Sandy knew it wasn't over. Not yet. This was just the first battle. The war would continue until Ray was actually in prison, actually punished, actually unable to hurt anyone else ever again. That evening Sandy stood in her house, empty now of Ray's presence, and called Diana. "He'll come back," Sandy said quietly. "This kind of person doesn't just accept defeat." "I know," Diana replied. "That's why I've already arranged security. You're being watched constantly. If Ray violates the restraining order, we'll know within seconds. How long until the criminal charges?" "Days, maybe a week. The DA is moving fast. Your case combined with Christine Valdez's testimony gives them a pattern. They're talking felony charges, Sandy. Serious prison time." Sandy sat down on her couch now, not theirs, and allowed herself to feel it. Relief, exhaustion, rage that hadn't burned out yet. Fear that this still might somehow fall apart. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "You think you've won?" Ray's voice, slurred with alcohol and fury. "You think you're so fucking smart, but I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you love. Sandy hung up and immediately called Diana, who'd already been alerted by the security system's call recording. "He just violated the restraining order," Diana said grimly. "That's another criminal charge. The police are looking for him now. Ray was arrested at 11 p.m. at a bar downtown, drunk and ranting about his wife's betrayal. He spent the night in jail. Sandy spent it in her grandmother's study, reading through Evelyn's journal one more time, remembering what strength looked like. In the morning, formal criminal charges would be filed. The real trial would begin. And Sandy would finally get her grandmother's ultimate wish, Ray Allen completely destroyed, unable to ever hurt anyone again. But tonight, she was just grateful to be safe, to be free, to be herself again. Chapter 6. The Long Game. Ray's desperation manifested in ways Sandy hadn't anticipated, and it made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. Within days of the restraining order, he launched a systematic whisper campaign designed to destroy Sandy's credibility before the criminal trial could even begin. He called every single person they'd ever known, her distant cousins, old work colleagues from the architecture firm, neighbors, people she'd gone to college with years ago, spinning an elaborate story about Sandy's mental breakdown and his heroic attempts to get her help, despite her paranoid delusions about him. "I'm so worried about her," Ray would say, his voice perfectly pitched with concern. "She's convinced herself I'm some kind of villain, but it's really just her illness talking. The doctors say she needs treatment, but she's refusing. I don't know what else to do." Sandy's phone lit up constantly with well-meaning messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Are you okay?" Ray called and said, "You're struggling. Do you need help?" "I heard about your breakdown. I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Ray mentioned you're having delusions. Have you considered getting professional help?" Each message felt like a small knife sliding between her ribs. Ray was poisoning her reputation, making sure that if she tried to tell anyone the truth, they'd already been primed to see her as mentally unstable and unreliable. But Diana Torres was 3 steps ahead, documenting every single call Ray made, every person he contacted. "This is witness tampering," Diana explained grimly, showing Sandy the call logs they'd obtained through entirely legal means. "Every contact he makes is evidence of his desperate attempt to control the narrative. It actually helps our case." "It doesn't feel helpful," Sandy admitted, staring at another concerned message from a former colleague. "It feels like he's slowly erasing me all over again, making everyone believe I'm crazy." "He's making himself look guilty," Diana corrected. "Innocent people don't launch elaborate campaigns to discredit their accusers. They cooperate with investigations and trust the truth. Ray's behavior screams consciousness of guilt." The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source 2 weeks after the restraining order. A doctor named William Anderson, one of Ray's former colleagues from the hospital where both Ray and Helena worked, contacted Diana directly through her professional website. "I need to talk about Ray Allen," his message said. "There's something you should know, something I should have said years ago." They met at a restaurant across town, somewhere public but quiet. Anderson was nervous, kept glancing around like Ray might materialize from thin air, fidgeting with his water glass. "This is hard to talk about," Anderson began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've felt guilty about staying silent for 5 years, but when I heard about the conservatorship case, about what Ray tried to do to Sandy, I realized I couldn't keep quiet anymore." "What happened 5 years ago?" Diana asked, already recording the conversation with Anderson's consent. "There was another woman, Christine Valdez. She dated Ray for about a year before he met Sandy. Christine had money, not as much as Sandy's grandmother, but enough. Family inheritance from her parents' successful restaurant business, maybe 2 or 3 million. Sandy felt ice spread through her chest. Ray targeted her the same way he targeted me. Anderson nodded miserably. It was the exact same pattern. At first Ray was charming, attentive, perfect. Then Christine started having problems, memory issues, confusion, difficulty concentrating. Ray suggested she see a psychiatrist to help manage what he called her stress. "Let me guess," Diana said. "Dr. Marcus Westfield." "Exactly. Westfield recommended Christine take a leave from work, suggested Ray help manage her finances temporarily while she focused on her health. But Christine's brother was a lawyer, a real lawyer, not the kind on Ray's payroll. He got suspicious, demanded Christine get a second opinion from a completely independent psychiatrist." "What did the second doctor find?" Sandy asked, though she already knew the answer was going to destroy her. "Nothing wrong with Christine at all. No mental illness, no cognitive problems. But she had been taking medication. Pills Ray had given her, telling her they were supplements to help with her stress and energy levels. When Christine's brother had those pills analyzed, they contained benzodiazepines, the same class of medication you found in your vitamins, Sandy. Ray had been systematically drugging her to cause the symptoms he then claimed proved she needed a conservator. The restaurant felt too hot suddenly, the air too thick. Sandy forced herself to keep breathing. "What happened to Christine? Why didn't she press charges?" Anderson's face filled with guilt and shame. "That's why I've felt terrible for 5 years. Christine was humiliated. She'd been so completely fooled, had trusted Ray so absolutely. She just wanted to forget the whole thing happened. She ended the relationship immediately, moved to Oregon, started over. Her brother wanted her to go to the police, but Christine refused. She said she couldn't bear everyone knowing how stupid she'd been." "She wasn't stupid," Sandy said fiercely. "She was targeted by a predator who's very, very good at what he does. I know that now. But at the time, I convinced myself maybe I was wrong about what happened. Ray seemed so normal, so professional. He acted like Christine had just had some kind of breakdown and he'd tried to help. Within 6 months he'd met you at that charity gala and the whole thing started over again." Diana leaned forward intensely. "Would Christine testify? Would she be willing to go on record about what Ray did to her?" "I don't know, but I can give you her contact information. What Ray did to her, what he did to Sandy, it's the exact same pattern. That can't be coincidence. That's evidence of systematic predatory behavior." After Anderson left, Diana and Sandy sat in silence for several minutes. "He's done this before," Sandy finally said. "I'm not his first victim. I'm just the first one who didn't let him get away with it." "Which makes you incredibly dangerous to him," Diana replied. "And it makes our case infinitely stronger. One woman's allegations can be dismissed as misunderstanding or mental illness. 2 women describing identical patterns from the same man using the same corrupt psychiatrist. That's impossible to explain away as coincidence." They tracked down Christine Valdez through Anderson's contact information. She was living in Portland now, had remarried, was working as a restaurant manager. When Diana called her, Christine was silent for a long time after hearing why they were reaching out. "I tried so hard to forget that whole nightmare," Christine finally said, her voice tight with old pain. "It took me years to stop feeling ashamed, to stop blaming myself for being so gullible. I don't want to relive it." "I understand," Diana said gently, "but Ray's doing it to someone else now. He tried to do to Sandy exactly what he did to you, and she's fighting back. Your testimony could help stop him permanently. What if people don't believe me? What if they think I'm just bitter about a relationship that ended badly?" Sandy took the phone from Diana. My name is Sandy McLeish. Ray married me 8 years ago. He isolated me systematically, controlled every aspect of my life, had a secret vasectomy while convincing me my infertility was my body's failure. He destroyed my frozen embryos. He gave me pills he claimed were vitamins, but were actually drugs that made me confused and forgetful. He tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my grandmother's inheritance, and he used Dr. Marcus Westfield to do it, the exact same psychiatrist he used with you. Christine's sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. The same doctor, the exact same person. Westfield's been doing this for years, apparently, taking money to write fraudulent diagnoses. Ray's not the first to use him, but together, we can make sure he's the last. He told me I was the problem, Christine said, her voice breaking. He made me believe I was losing my mind. I actually started to think maybe I was crazy, maybe I couldn't trust my own perception of reality. It was the worst feeling I've ever experienced. Worse than when my parents died. Worse than anything. I know, Sandy said quietly. I felt exactly the same way, but we're not crazy. We were targeted by someone who's very skilled at psychological manipulation, and now we have a chance to make sure he can never do this to anyone else ever again. Christine was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? Your testimony, on the record, about what Ray did to you 5 years ago. Will people know? Will it be public? It'll be part of a criminal trial, so yes, it'll be public record. Your name will be in court documents. People you know might find out. And what about him? Will Ray go to prison? If we can prove he's done this systematically to multiple women, yes, he's facing felony charges, decades in prison. Christine took a deep breath. Then I'll do it. I'll testify, but on one condition. What's that? You promise me you'll destroy him, completely, so he can never hurt anyone else the way he hurt us. I promise, Sandy said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That's exactly what I intend to do. Christine's deposition was recorded 3 days later via video conference with Jameson's office. She was nervous but determined, and her testimony was devastating in its specificity. Ray Allen and I dated for 14 months, Christine said, looking directly into the camera. At first, he seemed perfect, attentive, charming, genuinely interested in my life and work. But gradually, things changed. He started suggesting I was forgetful, that I was making mistakes at work, that I seemed confused about things we'd discussed. I started doubting myself. When did the medical issues begin? Jameson asked. About 8 months into the relationship, I was having real problems, memory gaps, difficulty concentrating, feeling foggy and disconnected. Ray suggested I see Dr. Westfield, said he was an excellent psychiatrist who specialized in stress-related disorders. Westfield diagnosed me with early-stage cognitive decline and recommended I take leave from my job, let Ray help manage my finances temporarily. What happened next? My brother got suspicious. He's a lawyer, and something about the whole situation bothered him. He insisted I get a second opinion from a psychiatrist he found, someone with no connection to Ray or Westfield. The second doctor found absolutely nothing wrong with me, no cognitive issues, no mental illness. But he noticed I was taking medication that wasn't prescribed. Pills Ray had given me. When we had those pills analyzed, they contained benzodiazepines. What did you do when you learned this? I ended the relationship immediately and moved away. I was humiliated. I felt stupid for trusting him. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. Christine's voice hardened. But I should have gone to the police. If I had, maybe Sandy would never have been targeted. That's why I'm testifying now, because I didn't speak up 5 years ago and someone else got hurt. When the deposition ended, Jameson looked grim but satisfied. This changes the entire case. We're not looking at one incident of fraud anymore. We're looking at a pattern of serial predatory behavior. Ray's been doing this for years, using the same methods, the same corrupt psychiatrist, the same playbook. That elevates everything. What does that mean for charges? Sandy asked. It means the DA is going to go after him hard. This isn't a one-time mistake or bad judgment. This is a calculated pattern of targeting vulnerable women, drugging them, stealing their assets. With Christine's testimony added to yours, Ray's looking at serious prison time, multiple felony counts. Within a week, new criminal charges were filed. Ray was arrested again, this time on charges of criminal assault against both Sandy and Christine, conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal practicing of medicine without a license, and attempted theft. The bail was set at $5 million, money Ray no longer had access to since all his assets were frozen pending the civil proceedings. He stayed in jail, unable to make bail, waiting for trial. And Sandy? Sandy finally started to breathe again. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in November when the city felt like it was holding its breath. Sandy dressed in navy blue, professional, composed, strong. She wanted the jury seeing a survivor who'd fought back, not a victim who'd stayed broken. Her hair was pulled back simply, minimal jewelry, no unnecessary drama. Let the evidence speak. Let the truth be enough. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media filled every available seat. Ray's former colleagues sat in uncomfortable clusters. Sandy's few remaining family members, cousins she barely knew, had shown up out of morbid curiosity or misplaced family loyalty. The case had become something bigger than just Sandy versus Ray. It represented something about power, about men who preyed on women, about systems that enabled abuse until someone finally said enough. Ray sat at the defense table looking like a ghost of his former self. 3 months in jail had stripped away everything polished about him. His expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that had lost weight. His face was hollow, eyes darting nervously. When Sandy entered, he watched her with pure hatred mixed with something that might have been fear. Good. He should be afraid. The prosecutor, Lauren Huang, was everything Jameson had promised, sharp, relentless, with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys sweat. She'd reviewed every piece of evidence and told Sandy privately, "This is the most complete case I've prosecuted in 15 years. Your husband documented his own crimes. Most criminals try to hide evidence. He created it." Jury selection took 2 long days. Jameson sat beside Sandy throughout, occasionally leaning over to whisper observations. "That man's a divorced father. He'll sympathize with your situation. That woman works in healthcare. Christine and Helena's testimony will resonate with her professional understanding." Finally, the trial began. Prosecutor Huang stood and delivered her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a predator. Ray Allen has a type, women with money. He has a method, isolation, systematic drugging, fraudulent psychiatry. He has a goal, stealing everything they own. 5 years ago, he targeted Christine Valdez using these exact methods. She escaped. 2 years ago, he married Sandy McLeish and tried again, but Sandy fought back. How many others didn't? How many women are out there who never came forward because they were too ashamed, too broken, too convinced by Ray's lies that they were the problem?" Ray's lawyer, a new attorney since Whitmore had abandoned the case, tried to paint a different picture. Martin Voss was a criminal defense specialist known for aggressive tactics. "What you're going to hear is a story of a vindictive woman who became paranoid when her marriage failed. Ray Allen loved his wife. He tried to help her, and now she's weaponizing the legal system against him because she can't accept that their relationship ended." But the evidence destroyed any narrative Voss tried to build. Prosecutor Huang presented it methodically. The pills containing benzodiazepines, medical records of the secret vasectomy, financial documents showing systematic theft, recordings of Ray discussing his plans, Christine's testimony establishing pattern, Diana's investigation showing premeditation, each piece built on the previous one until the case became overwhelming. Christine Valdez took the stand on day 3, flying in from Portland specifically to testify. She was visibly nervous but determined. "Ms. Valdez, please describe your relationship with the defendant," Prosecutor Huang began. "We dated for 14 months. At first, Ray seemed perfect. Then I started having memory problems, confusion. Ray suggested Dr. Westfield. The doctor said I needed psychiatric help, that Ray should manage my finances temporarily. But my brother insisted on a second opinion. The new doctor found nothing wrong except that I was being drugged. The pills Ray gave me contained medication that caused my symptoms. Why didn't you press charges at the time? Christine's voice cracked. I was humiliated. I felt stupid for trusting him. I just wanted to forget it happened. She looked directly at the jury. But if I'd spoken up then, maybe Sandy would never have been targeted. That's why I'm here now, because I stayed silent and someone else got hurt. Voss tried to discredit her on cross-examination, suggesting she was lying out of bitterness. But Christine held firm, and her testimony was backed by medical records and her brother's contemporaneous documentation. Helena Morrison testified next, granted immunity in exchange for cooperation. 7 months pregnant now, she looked small and frightened on the stand. Dr. Morrison, what was your relationship with the defendant? We had an affair. Ray told me Sandy was mentally ill, that he was trying to help her. I believed him. I helped him plan the conservatorship, recommended Dr. Westfield, provided false testimony about Sandy's condition. Did you know the defendant had done this before? Not until after I agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. When I learned about Christine Valdez, I realized I'd helped a predator. I'm ashamed of what I did. Are you testifying to avoid punishment? Yes, Helena admitted honestly, but also because I'm going to be a mother. I don't want my child growing up visiting their father in prison, and I don't want my daughter knowing I helped destroy another woman. The prosecution rested after 8 days. The defense called character witnesses who described Ray as a good doctor, a caring colleague. But none of them could explain the physical evidence, the pattern, the systematic nature of his crimes. Ray himself chose not to testify. Voss knew he'd be destroyed on cross-examination. Closing arguments were devastating. Prosecutor Huang laid out the timeline, the pattern, the undeniable evidence of serial predatory behavior. Voss tried to create reasonable doubt, but had nothing to work with except desperate speculation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty of criminal assault against Sandy McLeish. Guilty of criminal assault against Christine Valdez. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty on every single count. Ray collapsed. Voss tried to maintain composure, but clearly knew it was over. Judge Morrison set sentencing for 2 weeks. As bailiffs led Ray away, he looked at Sandy one final time. She held his gaze with absolute calm, letting him see exactly what he'd created, a woman who survived and became stronger. Outside, media swarmed. Sandy delivered the brief statement Jameson had helped her prepare. Ray Allen targeted vulnerable women, drugged them, and tried to steal their futures. He's been stopped. To anyone in a similar situation, document everything, find people you trust, fight back. You're stronger than you know. That night, Sandy finally allowed herself to fully feel it. Relief, exhaustion, something that might have been the beginning of actual peace. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Sentencing day arrived with the weight of finality. Sandy wore white, not the white of surrender, but the white of new beginnings, of clean slates of transformation. She was no longer the broken woman Ray had tried to create. She was someone entirely new, forged in fire, tested beyond limits, unbreakable. Judge Morrison entered, and the courtroom rose. Mr. Allen, please stand. Ray stood with difficulty, and Sandy saw he'd aged years in 3 months. Judge Morrison's voice was steel. In 18 years on this bench, your case disturbs me uniquely. You didn't act from passion or mental illness. You acted with calculation over years. You identified vulnerable women, earned their trust, isolated them, then systematically destroyed their mental health while stealing their assets. You drugged your wife. You destroyed her embryos. You did this to Christine Valdez, and evidence suggests you would have continued indefinitely. The courtroom was silent as death. On the charge of criminal assault against Sandra McLeish, I sentence you to 15 years. On criminal assault against Christine Valdez, 10 years consecutive. On fraud charges, 5 years consecutive. Total sentence, 30 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 20 years. Ray swayed. His lawyer caught him. Additionally, full restitution of all stolen assets, punitive damages of $5 million, permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with both victims for life. Judge Morrison closed her folder. Mr. Allen, you tried to bury strong women. You failed. They're here, whole and free. You're going to prison until you're elderly. I hope that knowledge haunts you. Bailiffs took Ray away. He didn't look back. Outside, Sandy delivered her final statement. Ray Allen will spend 30 years in prison, but this isn't about revenge. It's about protection, about stopping a predator. To Christine Valdez, who found courage to speak, thank you. To every survivor, you're not alone. 3 weeks later, the civil case concluded. Ray's assets were liquidated and returned. More importantly, justice. Helena gave birth, moved away, sent a letter Sandy never answered. Dr. Westfield lost his license and faced his own charges. The conservatorship fraud he'd enabled for years was exposed, freeing dozens of victims. 2 months after sentencing, Sandy stood in her grandmother's study and read Evelyn's journal one final time. If you're reading this after victory, congratulations. But now comes the hardest part, learning to live without the fight. Build something beautiful, help others, live fully. Sandy closed the journal and made a decision. Chapter 9. The Phoenix. 6 months after Ray's sentencing, Sandy stood before a rundown warehouse, blueprints spread across her car hood. First floor for legal aid, she explained to Jameson and Diana. Second floor therapy services. Third floor emergency housing. The McLeish Foundation, comprehensive support for women escaping abuse. Jameson studied the blueprints, then the dilapidated building. This is ambitious. Renovation costs. I know what it costs, Sandy interrupted gently. I have $40 million, and Ray's returned stolen assets. Money I earned by surviving. Money that should help other women survive too. Diana circled the building, assessing security. You'll need excellent surveillance. Women fleeing abusers need absolute safety, multiple exits, reinforced doors, panic rooms. Already in the plans, Sandy said. This isn't just a building. It's a fortress disguised as sanctuary. What are you calling it? Jameson asked. The McLeish Foundation, after my grandmother. She spent 40 years building an empire in a business that tried to exclude women. She survived everything. Now her name represents survival and transformation for women who need to remember they can do the same. The foundation launched 4 months later with a ribbon cutting that drew media attention. Sandy stood at the podium before the restored building and delivered her speech. I'm not here as a victim, Sandy began, voice steady. I'm here as a survivor who was given resources most women escaping abuse don't have. I had my grandmother's inheritance for excellent lawyers. I had Diana documenting evidence. I had Jameson fighting for justice. Most women have none of those things. The McLeish Foundation exists to level that playing field. She paused, looking at the crowd, survivors, journalists, advocates. We offer comprehensive legal representation at zero cost. We provide trauma therapy with counselors who understand systematic abuse. We offer emergency housing with security that allows women to sleep safely for the first time in years. We do this because my grandmother taught me, McLeish women don't just survive, we make sure others can survive too. The foundation's first client arrived 3 hours after the ribbon cutting. Jennifer Martinez looked exactly like Sandy had 8 months ago, hollowed by fear, jumping at sounds, apologizing for existing. She carried a backpack with everything she owned and held her 5-year-old daughter's hand so tightly the child whimpered. I saw you on the news, Jennifer whispered. You said you help women like me, but I don't have money. I can't pay for lawyers or therapy or anything. Sandy knelt to the daughter's level. What's your name, sweetie? Maya, the girl whispered, hiding behind her mother. Hi, Maya. I'm Sandy. We have toys upstairs. Would you like to see them while your mom and I talk? A counselor gently led Maya away. Jennifer's eyes tracked her daughter with hypervigilance. She's safe here, Sandy said. You're both safe. Now tell me what happened. Jennifer's story spilled in fragments. Controlling husband monitoring her phone, location, every penny, using their daughter as a weapon, threatening to take Maya if Jennifer left. Financial abuse, leaving her no access to accounts, no escape, escalating threats of violence. He told me if I tried to take Maya and leave, he'd convince everyone I was unfit, Jennifer said, tears streaming. He has documentation of my mental instability, friends who'll testify I'm dangerous. He's so successful, so respected, everyone believes him. I'm nothing. I have no education, no job, no way to fight. Sandy recognized every element because she'd lived it. The destruction of self-worth, manufactured evidence, isolation, eliminating support systems, threats calibrated to paralyze with fear. You're not nothing, Sandy said firmly. You're a mother protecting her daughter. You're a survivor who found courage to escape. And you're not alone anymore. The foundation provides everything: housing, legal representation, therapy, job training, childcare, security. We're going to help you build a life where your husband has no power over you or Maya ever again. He'll find me, Jennifer whispered, terror evident. He always finds me. I tried leaving twice and he tracked me within hours. He has money, connections, investigators. How can you keep me safe? Diana entered at exactly the right moment. I'm Diana Torres. I documented evidence that put Sandy's husband in prison for 30 years. Your safety is my primary concern. I've designed security protocols for women in your situation. Your husband won't find you here. Over 3 hours, they built Jennifer's safety plan. Temporary housing in secure third-floor apartments with biometric access and 24/7 monitoring. Legal representation from Jameson's firm for emergency custody orders and restraining orders. Therapy for Jennifer and Maya. Job training consultations for financial independence. By the time they were settled, modest but clean, safe, theirs, Jennifer was crying different tears. I didn't think anyone would believe me, she said. I thought I'd die in that house or lose Maya forever. I didn't know places like this existed. We exist because women like my grandmother and women like you refuse to disappear, Sandy said. You're going to rebuild. It won't be easy or fast, but you'll do it. And we'll support you through every step. The foundation grew rapidly. Within 3 months, 18 women and their children. Within 6 months, they expanded to a second building. Media coverage drew national attention. Donations poured in from survivors wanting to support the mission. Sandy hired more lawyers, counselors, security staff, created job training programs, established a children's program for therapy and tutoring, built relationships with judges who fast-tracked cases, but the work was harder emotionally than anticipated. Every woman carried stories mirroring Sandy's trauma. Every description of systematic abuse, manufactured evidence, terrified mothers fearing losing children. It reopened wounds, still healing. Some nights after difficult meetings, Sandy cried for hours. The weight of all that pain felt overwhelming. She attended weekly therapy, processing vicarious trauma, but she kept going, because Jennifer got full custody of Maya after 4 months, because Carmen escaped and started nursing school, because Aisha's husband was arrested after foundation lawyers presented evidence, because every victory, however small, mattered desperately to the woman experiencing it. On the foundation's 1-year anniversary, Sandy organized a celebration. The courtyard filled with women who'd found safety and rebuilt lives, children playing in the garden Sandy had created. Diana gave a speech about evidence documentation. Jameson discussed legal reforms. Survivors shared transformation stories. When Sandy spoke, she stood before these warriors who'd refused to disappear and felt something shift inside, not the cold rage that sustained her through Ray's trial, not the driving need for revenge, but something softer, something that might be actual healing. A year ago, I watched my husband sentenced to 30 years for systematically abusing me and attempting to steal everything my grandmother built, Sandy said, voice clear. I thought that verdict was the end, that justice meant closure, that winning would make everything better. But I learned something. Justice and healing aren't the same. Justice is external, courts and consequences. Healing is internal, the slow work of rebuilding after someone tried to destroy you. She looked at the faces watching, women in various stages of healing journeys. The foundation exists because justice isn't enough. You need safety, resources, support, time, space to rebuild. You need people who believe you, who validate your experiences, who understand that leaving is just the beginning. You need to remember you're not broken. You were broken by someone else, and breaking isn't permanent. You can heal, you can rebuild, you can become someone new and stronger. The courtyard erupted in applause. Women stood, some crying, some cheering, all understanding exactly what Sandy meant because they were living their own versions. Later, Jameson found Sandy alone on a garden bench looking at emerging stars. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Better than I thought possible a year ago," Sandy admitted. "When Ray was sentenced, I thought that was the pinnacle, that justice was the goal, and everything after would be aftermath. But this is better than justice. This is actual joy. This is a life I built deliberately rather than one that happened to me." "Your grandmother knew," Jameson said, nodding toward Evelyn's portrait through the garden doors. "That's why she left resources and evidence, but not the plan. She knew you'd fight your own way through and that the fighting would transform you into exactly who you needed to become." Sandy raised her water glass toward the portrait in silent toast. "She was always 3 steps ahead, even in death, still teaching me, still pushing me toward my best self." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged fully, and Sandy felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine peace, not the absence of pain. She still carried that, probably always would. But peace with who she'd become, the purpose she'd found, the life she was carefully building. Ray Allen had wanted to erase her. Instead, she'd become more visible, more powerful, more impactful than she'd ever been before. That was the ultimate revenge. Not his suffering, but her flourishing. And as Sandy sat in the garden at the foundation her grandmother's love made possible, she understood she'd finally, truly won. Not the trial, not the case, not the conviction. She'd won herself back. And that was everything. Chapter 10. The Legacy. 3 years after the Foundation's launch, Sandy stood in a legislative chamber watching history happen. The bill had been debated for 6 months, revised and amended and fought over. Sandy had testified twice, sharing her story and the stories of hundreds of women the Foundation helped. Diana presented evidence of systematic conservatorship abuse. Jameson outlined legal frameworks for better protections. Now, finally, the vote. Senate Bill 2847, the Conservatorship Abuse Prevention Act, also known as Evelyn's Law, the Speaker announced. "All in favor?" The electronic board lit up with green votes. More green than red, significantly more. "The bill passes. Evelyn's Law is now law." The gallery erupted. The bill had passed the House months ago with bipartisan support. Today's Senate vote was the final hurdle before the governor's guaranteed signature. Sandy felt tears streaming as she watched her grandmother's name, Evelyn McLeish, who'd built an empire and raised a warrior, become legislation protecting vulnerable people. The law required judges to complete specialized training on coercive control before hearing conservatorship cases. It mandated independent psychiatric evaluations from court-appointed doctors. It created oversight committees investigating abuse claims. It established harsh penalties for lawyers and doctors participating in fraudulent filings. It wouldn't save everyone, but it would save some. And saving some was better than saving none. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Jameson whispered beside her, hand finding hers. Sandy thought about Evelyn. Brilliant, fierce, unbreakable. She already is. Wherever she is, she's watching and knowing her legacy isn't just money. It's this. It's protection. It's women surviving because she equipped me to fight. That evening, the Foundation hosted a celebration. The building that started as one rundown warehouse was now 3 buildings serving women across the region. Original structure housed legal services, therapy, administration. Second building provided emergency housing with secure apartments. Third, newest addition, offered job training, education programs, childcare. Sandy had hired 35 staff, established partnerships with law enforcement and courts, helped over 500 women rebuild lives. The foundation had become comprehensive support, addressing every barrier keeping women trapped. But more than that, it had become community. Women who'd arrived terrified and broken stayed connected after rebuilding, returning as volunteers, donors, advocates. They mentored newer clients. They created a survivor network, understanding each other's struggles and celebrating victories. Jennifer Martinez, first client, now worked as program coordinator, using her experience to connect with women in crisis. She'd completed her GED, community college, professional training. Maya was thriving, the terrified 5-year-old transformed into a confident 8-year-old. Sandy moved through the celebration, greeting women whose journeys she'd witnessed, meeting children who'd found safety, thanking donors who'd made expansion possible. Jameson's presence beside her throughout, steady, supportive, careful, never to crowd but always available. Their relationship had developed slowly over 3 years, built on friendship and trust rather than urgency. They'd been dating seriously for 18 months. Last month, Jameson had asked if Sandy would consider marriage eventually, when ready, if ever ready. Sandy had said yes, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him, because she'd healed enough to risk vulnerability again, because she'd learned the difference between healthy partnership and controlling dependence, because Jameson understood the foundation would always be essential to who she was. They'd set a wedding date for 6 months away, small ceremony at the foundation, immediate family and close friends, reception in the courtyard garden. Evelyn's portrait would watch, Evelyn McLeish, whose love and foresight made everything possible. Later that night, after the celebration, Sandy sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports. 537 women served in 3 years, 412 children provided therapy, 218 custody cases won, 83 abusers prosecuted. Evelyn's law passed. Numbers representing real lives, real transformations, real futures that wouldn't have existed without this work. Her phone buzzed. Diana. Ray's final appeal was denied. The conviction stands. He's not getting out, Sandy. He serves the full 30. Sandy stared at the message, waiting to feel something, satisfaction, relief, vindication. But mostly she felt nothing. Ray had become irrelevant, reduced to an occasional administrative detail rather than constant presence in her thoughts. She typed back, "Good, thanks for the update." That was the thing nobody told you. Eventually, the person who hurt you just stopped mattering. They became a footnote rather than the main character. Their suffering stopped being satisfying because you'd moved so far beyond them, their existence barely registered. Ray was in prison, denied parole, would spend decades there, and Sandy felt nothing. No joy in his punishment, no anger at his crimes, just complete indifference to his existence. Because her life wasn't about Ray Allen anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. Her life was about Jennifer and Maya and Carmen and Aisha and 500 other women whose names she knew by heart. It was about Evelyn's law and legislative reforms protecting vulnerable people. It was about the foundation growing and reaching more women. It was about Jameson and the careful, beautiful relationship they were building. It was about healing and transformation and purpose. Ray had tried to destroy her. He'd failed so completely, he'd actually done the opposite. He'd forged her into something stronger, clearer, more powerful than she'd been before, and that was ultimate revenge. Not his suffering, but her absolute flourishing. Not his punishment, but her complete transformation. Sandy closed the reports and looked at the photograph on her desk. Evelyn McLeish in her prime, standing before her first property development, looking fierce and proud and unbreakable. "We did it, Grandma," Sandy whispered. "We took everything he tried to destroy and built something beautiful. Your money is helping hundreds survive. Your name is on legislation protecting vulnerable people. Your legacy isn't just survival, it's transformation. She could almost hear Evelyn's response. I knew you could, baby girl. I always knew. McLeish women don't break. We rebuild, and you've rebuilt something magnificent. Sandy turned off her light and headed home, to the house she'd bought with her own money, decorated with her own choices, filled with her own life. Not the prison Ray created, a real home reflecting who she actually was. Jameson met her there. They'd been discussing whether he should move in officially, whether Sandy was ready for that commitment, whether cohabitation felt safe given her history. Come in, Sandy said, making the decision. Not just tonight, permanently. Move in with me. Let's build this life together for real. Jameson searched her face carefully. Are you sure? We don't have to rush anything. I'm sure, Sandy said, and she was. I spent 8 years in a house that was Ray's prison for me. I spent 3 years building a home that's truly mine. Now I want it to be ours. Not because I need you, but because I want you here. Because you've earned the trust Ray destroyed. Because I'm ready to risk vulnerability with someone who's proven they deserve it. They stood on Sandy's porch in cool evening air, and Jameson smiled. Then yes, I'd be honored to build a life with you in every sense. 6 months later, they married at the foundation. Small ceremony, Diana as maid of honor, Jennifer and Carmen and Aisha standing with Sandy, Jameson's brother as best man. Maya served as flower girl, her confidence testifying to healing. Evelyn's portrait watched, and Sandy felt her grandmother's presence like a blessing. The vows Sandy wrote spoke of survival and rebuilding, of choosing love after betrayal, of trusting again. You've shown me that healthy partnership doesn't erase who I am. It makes space for me to become more fully myself. You've proven that love doesn't control or diminish. It supports and elevates. You've taught me I can be both independent and connected, both strong and vulnerable, both self-sufficient and willing to build something together. Thank you for your patience, your respect, your absolute commitment to my healing. I choose you not because I need rescuing, but because you've never tried to rescue me. You've just walked beside me while I rescued myself. After the ceremony, during the reception in the garden, Sandy stood beneath the trellis she'd planted 3 years ago, now covered in flowering vines creating natural canopy. She watched the celebration, survivors, staff, donors, advocates, all gathered to witness 2 people choosing each other carefully and intentionally. Jameson found her there offering champagne. Happy? More than I thought possible 3 years ago, Sandy admitted. When Ray was sentenced, I thought that was the pinnacle, that justice was the goal. But this is better. This is actual joy. This is a life I built deliberately, rather than one that happened to me. Your grandmother knew, Jameson said, nodding toward Evelyn's portrait. That's why she left resources and evidence, but not the plan. She knew you'd fight your own way through, and that the fighting would transform you into exactly who you needed to become. Sandy raised her glass toward the portrait in silent toast. She was always 3 steps ahead, even in death still teaching me. The reception continued late. Sandy danced with Jameson, with Diana, with Maya, who stood on Sandy's feet, like Sandy had done with Evelyn as a child. She gave a speech, thanking everyone who'd supported the foundation. She cut cake and laughed and celebrated, surrounded by people who'd witnessed her journey from broken to rebuilt. Later, when she and Jameson went home to the house now officially theirs together, Sandy stood before the mirror, the same mirror that had hidden Evelyn's safe, where she discovered evidence changing everything. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back, not because she looked different physically, but because she carried herself entirely differently. Shoulders back, spine straight, eyes clear and direct. No more apologizing for existing, no more making herself smaller, no more disappearing. This was Sandy McLeish, survivor, advocate, founder, wife on her own terms, warrior forged in fire and emerged stronger. Ray Allen had tried to erase her from existence. He'd systematically destroyed everything about her personality and agency. He'd planned to lock her away where no one would believe her, where she'd slowly disappear completely. Instead, she'd become more visible, more powerful, more impactful than she'd ever been as his controlled wife. She'd taken his worst and transformed it into her best. She'd turned trauma into purpose. She'd converted pain into power, helping hundreds of other women do the same. And that was victory far more complete than anything a courtroom could provide. Sandy turned from the mirror and joined Jameson in their bedroom, their space, their home, their carefully chosen future. Tomorrow, she'd return to the foundation and help more women escape the nightmare she'd survived. Tomorrow, she'd continue pushing for Evelyn's law implementation. Tomorrow, she'd keep building the legacy her grandmother started. But tonight, she'd rest, she'd celebrate, she'd allow herself to simply be happy in this life she'd fought so hard to claim. Because Sandy McLeish wasn't Ray Allen's victim anymore. She was Evelyn McLeish's granddaughter, carrying forward a legacy of strength and survival and transformation. She was a warrior who'd won her hardest battle. She was free. And freedom, she'd learned, was the sweetest revenge of all. The end.